It's so quiet.
Welcome to Coastside Poetry. Thanks to those of you who've zoomed in and those who are watching on YouTube. We meet either physically or virtually on the second Tuesday of every month to celebrate spoken poetry. I'm Diane Lee Moomey, and Steve Long and I are your hosts this evening. Our featured poet event is being recorded and streamed live onto YouTube as we speak. So anyone can look at it later. We'll be posting the link on our website, coastsidepoetry.org. This evening, we welcome Bay Area poet Austin Smith. Austin is the author of two poetry collections, Flyover Country and Almanac. He's received the Wallace Stegner Fellowship in Fiction at Stanford, an NEA Fellowship in Prose, and the Amy Lowell Traveling Scholarship in Poetry. He teaches undergraduate creative writing as a Jones lecturer at Stanford and now lives in San Francisco. And now, please welcome Austin Smith.
Thank you so much. Thank you, Diane. I really appreciate the invitation to join you all tonight. I was teaching today, so I'm not used to being paid such attention to. My students were. No, it's very lovely to be back. I think I read it, the series. We were just talking before, quite a number of years ago. So I'm really very grateful for all of these labors of passion in the poetry world that keep things like this going at a time where I feel like it's easy to become very despondent about the future of the humanities and of poetry, etc. So thank you very much. And tonight I thought I would do something maybe a little bit different in that I would love to share some newer work. And I haven't made a list of the poems I'm going to read, so it's going to be a little bit scattershot, but it's exciting for me to kind of share some new work. This isn't supposed to be some kind of shameless self-promotion, but I have an email listserv where I send a poem a day out to a group of people. Now, I don't always make it a poem a day. Sometimes it's a poem a fortnight, but for the most part, I'm able to get a poem out most days. As far as I can tell, the only readership is really my mom and a couple former students who've gleefully tracked this down. But I could absolutely share with you how to sign up for that. It's a Substack listserv. It's very easy. It's free. And I'm only saying that because, yeah, I know I'm going to do my best to slow down as I read, but if you find yourself like missing some things, there's a way to read these poems online if you wish, and hopefully someday in print, but right now they're just on my computer. So the first one that I stumbled upon as I was looking through my documents here was a poem about a neighbor of ours when I was a kid. I grew up on a farm in Illinois. We only had one neighbor, and he was a mechanic, and they basically had a kind of like scrapyard, and they're very, very poor, lived in a double-wide trailer. And I wanted to write a poem for Bob Bechtel, it's the name of the mechanic. So the first poem I'll share is called The Mechanic. Bob, we bring you cars that won't turn over, batteries bleeding blue out of their ears, radiators that radiate nothing. Like Shakespeare's and then Auden's dyer's hand, yours is blackened by your art. You may change oil, but you yourself will never change. Your sons and daughters gladly drive the ones you pronounced dead, but you weren't lying. Under your calm hands, they came back to life. Not all of them. The definitely dead you dragged off into the woods, out of sight of any sheriff who might happen by. In lieu of you, green saplings lift the hoods. Grass volts out of the crumbling foam seats. Even the wrecks the county brings to you undergo a kind of resurrection. Then it's as if the woods go joyriding. When they bury you, they will bury you with a few tools, in case you find one of God's chariots broken down outside heaven. All right. And by the way, I know it's a little bit awkward. I'm really excited to just have a conversation though with you. If anyone has a question, I think it would be totally fine if you want to put it in the chat. I'll keep an eye on it, and anything comes up, I'm really excited to have more of a conversation than to just read at you. So just in inviting you to ask anything that you're interested in. I wrote this poem that I'll read next after reading a French poet I hadn't heard of before. I don't even know I'm pronouncing his name correctly, but Charles Pigouet. Maybe someone can correct me if you've heard of this poet. And he has this long list of beatitudes. Blessed are these, blessed are those. And I decided to imitate that style in this poem, which is called Beatitudes. Blessed are the monarch butterflies forgetting to migrate. Blessed are the banyan trees singed but still standing. Blessed are the rivers trickling out from under the dam. Blessed are the mountains goofy from lobotomies. Blessed are the bees dead in their monasteries. Blessed are the deer stumbling, chronically wasted. Blessed are the winters grown mild with age. Blessed are the glaciers retracting their white tongues. Blessed are the sea turtles confused by warming sands. Blessed are the coral reefs tattered like heirloom lace. Blessed are the paintings safe under glass and tomato soup. Blessed are the activists turning the pipelines off. Blessed are the pimply hick police shyly arresting them. Blessed is the bruised moon that stands to inherit the earth. I read this poem. I had the opportunity this past summer to go to Spain for a writing residency, and I wrote this poem when I was there, the poem I just read. And this was up in the Pyrenees, and some poets, the Catalan poets, were at the residency, and it was really fun because they translated the poem. And the funniest line that we were working on together was the line, "Blessed are the pimply hick police," because I I feel like where I grew up, the cops were all like these hicks, like these boys, right? Like with acne. And I thought maybe that was unique to me, but everyone was laughing because apparently the cops in Spain are exactly the same kind of like over their heads and sort of just boys, with this really big responsibility of carrying guns. So it was fun to see that there was a connection there, even though we were coming from such different cultures. Okay, I think I'll read a poem. Oh gosh, I hope I don't bring it. I'll try to bring the mood up a little bit. This one is a darker poem. It's called The Dictator. I've been thinking a lot about like well, strongmen, Trump, Berlusconi, all these authoritarian figures, Putin, of course, and writing sort of a series of poems about like maybe a sort of I don't know if I'd say typical dictator, but almost just like a stand-in for that kind of leader. So this is one that I wrote a couple weeks ago now. It's called The Dictator. One night at dinner, the dictator's wife noticed how pale his hand was in comparison with hers. And within a week, a dozen of the most beautiful young men stood at the wrought iron gate of the palace. It was very hot. Lucky were the ones who happened to stand in the shadow of a statue of the dictator on horseback. The guards were curt with the one whose turn it was. He was ordered to strip down to his undershirt. and sit in a chair that wobbled on the cobblestones while the dictator's private doctor took his blood. When one of the young men fainted, a few who had already donated carried him quickly across the empty square, the guards' laughter echoing off the villas. That night, the dictator cried out in his sleep and was dead before his wife could light the lantern. Killed by the same poison the beautiful young man who'd fainted had swallowed, standing in the dictator's shadow. Well, writing poems like that do make me feel better, even if they're a bit futile. All right. Let's see if I can find a poem that feels a little brighter. I'm not sure I can, but I'm going to try. Okay, let's see, y'all. So when I was in Spain, I was able to spend some time in the Sagrada Familia. And I wrote a poem about the architect Gaudi. So this poem is called Gaudi. His cathedral like a novel, in which everything is so minutely described, not even an hour will pass in 700 pages. His cathedral, a young woman on acid trying to explain how children especially love it. It has to do with colors familiar from cartoons and the fact that it is unfinished like everything in the imagination is. Gaudi himself was almost unknown. No one could remember who gave him permission to build it. He walked to work amongst men paid to sweep the streets clean with long brooms, and old women on their way to morning mass. The women frowned at his monstrosity, crossing themselves as they crossed the street, as if to so much as glance at it might doom them to excess, when the wine they'd always drunk was rough stuff but good enough. One day, crossing the other way, distracted by a problem with the spires, he was struck down by a streetcar. No one recognized him. He died in the poverty ward. They kept working on his cathedral. They still are. I heard an American college girl tell her friends that she wanted to go to the Sangria Familia. She said it seriously. It wasn't a pun. So what if she said it wrong? Of all the places to go, she wanted to go there. And so what if, standing inside it, her bare American shoulders bathed in Nickelodeon light, she still didn't believe in God? She must have believed someone must have. Okay, thanks for the comments in the chat. Yeah, so it's the Sagrada Familia. She said sangria like the wine. Um, it was an easy mistake. But I thought it was quite funny. Okay, y'all. Another sad one. This poem is called Two Kittens. She brought the man two kittens, that he would not be lonely. What with winter? Thought surely he could keep two kittens alive. But when she went back to see how he was making out, he seemed not to realize they were dead. They're so sweet, he said, but won't eat. Okay. I don't know if anyone's living in the Bay Area who maybe saw the Botticelli show at the Legion of Honor. A couple of weeks ago, there was a beautiful Botticelli show in San Francisco. And I was admiring Botticelli's faces and flowers, and he was a beautiful painter of feet. So I wrote this little poem after visiting the exhibit. It's called Botticelli's Flowers. Botticelli's flowers are unlike eyes, always either completely closed or completely open, as if there are only two ways to be, completely closed or completely open. I'm seeing a request for another cat poem, a cat-related poem, a feline poem. And I appreciate that. Thank you, Diane. This is a poem that is in my book, Flyover Country.
That's one of my favorite poems of yours. Yeah.
Thank you. I appreciate that. Well, I did, as I said, grew up on a farm. There were lots of cats. There were lots of kittens. Maybe at one point there might have been 30 to 40 cats. And I wrote this poem because I was remembering looking for kittens in the haymow with my brothers. It was one of the things we did often. It was exciting to find a new litter of kittens. But I was also thinking about how terrifying that must have been for the mother cat, you know, to all of a sudden have these boys petting her kittens. And she would always move them after we found them. And you're going to hear it when I read the poem, but I didn't really intend for this poem to be political. But it did end up becoming sort of a poem in this vein of thinking about authoritarianism, fascism, these things that are sort of, I guess, on my mind, even when I'm just trying to write a poem about childhood. So that came through, and maybe you'll hear that a bit at the end of this poem. So, cat moving kittens. We must have known, even as we reached down to touch them, where we'd found them, shut-eyed and trembling, under a straw bale in the haymow, that she would move them that night, under cover of darkness, and that by finding them, we were making certain we wouldn't see them again, until we saw them crouching under the pickup like sullen teens, having gone as wild by then as they'd gone still in her mouth. That night, she made a decision any mother might make upon guessing the intentions of the state. To go and to go now, taking everything you love between your teeth. Thank you for asking me to read that poem. I appreciate that. Oh, yeah. I find myself not often writing I never really sit down intending to write a political poem. I think I feel, this is going to be just maybe a hot take, but I feel like poems where if I were to set out to try to write a political poem often fail for me as poems. But poems that sort of become political obliquely are the poems that really interest me. And are sort of the only political poems that I'll kind of let through. And, you know, I don't mean that that's the case for every poet, but for me personally, I find myself having to kind of encounter the political subject matter sort of like this poem did, where before I knew it, I was writing about a mother basically in a kind of refugee situation with her kittens. So I didn't expect that image to come to me. Robert Frost said that if the poet isn't surprised, there's no chance for the reader to be surprised. So I really love writing poems that surprise me. It's easier said than done, of course. But anyway, just a little aside on how that one came about. So, okay. I'm going to read a poem called Two Geese. This is a pretty recent poem. I feel like I'm just like, oh, I got to do this residency. I have been very lucky. But recently I was able to do a residency at the house where Ernest Hemingway lived in Idaho. Sadly, it's the house where he died. But they've made this very beautiful residency there. And so this was in Ketchum, Idaho. And being from San Francisco, well, I'm originally from the Midwest, so I'm not unfamiliar with snow, but it was very exciting for me to see snow again and to see some Canadian geese just kind of right outside the doorway of this little studio that you get as the writer in residence at the Hemingway House. And I saw these two geese and I wrote this poem. Two geese. Two geese have come to the French doors, their webbed feet acting like snowshoes, keeping them from sinking into the drift. An old married couple who've ceased speaking to each other, everything there is to say having been said. She in her gray dress, he in his great coat, tottering along, tolerating one another. He insisting they ought to just walk, she murmuring they should take a cab. They were given all they need by God. I believe I wasn't, which is why my coat is stuffed with their beautiful down. Having nothing, they have nothing to lose, only their bodies, capable of incredible feats of flight, their elegant necks, their nasally voices. They must, at some base level, love each other, if only because each is to the other the closest of their kind. And surely they know joy, and will know grief when one dies first, as one must. The snow, weighing them, finds them weightless. I tell myself to try and be more like them, then go back to doing my taxes. I was actually doing my taxes and was feeling very jealous of those who have nothing to report. By the way, Diane, I want to be cognizant of time, so feel free to give me a wave or if I end up hitting the time.
Oh, well, I don't know, another 6 or 7 minutes or so, and then we can have a little, well, invite folks to open their mics and ask you things or make noise or something. How does that sound?
Oh, that sounds good.
Okay.
That's good.
Okay.
Yeah. Thank you. Let's see. Maybe I'll read an elegy for my grandma who passed away in the spring. I wrote a lot of poems after her passing. And I want to read a poem about her purse because I think, when we write an elegy, it's hard sometimes to write about the whole person, but something that you associated with them becomes like the symbol of their life. And my grandma had this like unbelievable purse that was like full of everything. And so that's what I tried to get at with the purse. I remember reminding myself to remember to ask for your purse, morbid, young as you were. Or maybe you told me I could have it, recognizing how much I loved it. I can still see you peering down into its perfumed vastnesses, and yet I don't remember what it looked like. I couldn't pick it out of a lineup of purses. I only remember what it contained. Whitmanian, it contained multitudes. There was always gum. I know this because there wasn't a single time I asked and wasn't given some. Compacts with round mirrors glued into their lids. Brushes matted with hair. Tubes of lipstick. The crayon that silently swiveled up, shaped by your lips. The same lipstick you left on our cheeks, laughing as we wiped your kisses away. Whatever novel you were reading. Sunglasses, sunscreen. The money you pressed upon us, in which, when we refused it, you almost angrily insisted we take. The only time I saw you mad was when I tried to deny your love, which, being mine, I had no right to say no to. The 20s were so crisp, as if they'd been deposited into your purse directly by the Treasury. Oh, and tissues for when you cried. You cried a lot. In joy when we arrived, in sadness when we left. For once you're the one who's left, which means you must not be crying. You are going to leave me your purse. I don't know where it is, so I put it here on this page, so I can carry it with me the way you carried it, everywhere. Heart external to your chest, in which you kept everything that makes life lovely.
Lovely.
I forgot about that poem. I was reading it and it's like, wow, I forgot about that.
If it's out, if it's not, if it doesn't fit in with your mood tonight, then don't. But I love that.
Oh, I was talking about the poem I just read, Diane. You're talking about
I'm sorry.
the mummy poem.
Signals. I'm sorry.
No,
I'm
no.
blaming it on solar flares and my distracted attention. I'm so sorry.
Not at all. No, I was just saying, as I was reading the first poem, I hadn't really read it since I wrote it. Anyway, I would love to read the mummy poem. If you'll forgive me, I'm going to get up and get the other book, which is on my bookshelf. I'll be right back.
Is there any way we can keep him?
He's coming back. He just went to get his book.
Ever.
Here I am. Sorry, y'all. So this is a poem from my first book, very long ago, actually now, but it's called Almanac. I don't read from it much, so I appreciate you asking. Yeah, when I was a kid, there was a, do I want to preface this? No, you know what? I'm just going to read the poem because it pretty much explains it all. It's called The Mummy in the Freeport Art Museum. Amongst the masterpieces of the small town Picassos and Van Goghs, and photographs of the rural poor, and busts of dead Greeks, or the molds of busts donated by the Art Institute of Chicago to this dying town's little museum, there was a mummy, a real mummy, laid out in a dim lit room by himself. I used to go to the museum just to visit him, a pharaoh who, expecting an afterlife of beautiful virgins and infinite food and all the riches and jewels he'd enjoyed in earthly life, must have wondered how the hell he'd ended up in Freeport, Illinois. And I used to go alone into that room and stand beside his sarcophagus and say, my friend, I've asked myself the same thing. So, yes, Freeport, Illinois has seen better days. It's a little bit of a rough kind of, a little bit of one of those rough kind of Midwestern towns, not a lot going on there. But my dad is actually a poet himself. I became a poet most likely because of going to my dad's poetry readings, and they were at the art museum. And I remember this mummy and just being like, what the hell is this mummy doing here? And how did this mummy end up in Freeport? It just seemed very cruel. But I don't know. The mummy seemed content enough, so maybe I'm wrong. Okay, y'all. I'm gonna read another poem. Maybe I'll read a poem. I'll read a poem about fireflies, which I miss seeing. Actually, there aren't as many fireflies anymore in the Midwest. There's actually they're nothing like when I was little. And I'm not just saying that, because of, the classic, like when I was little, like there were, but it's really possible we feel that maybe all of the spray, all the pesticide and herbicide has really impacted their population. So fireflies. Your dad tells you he's seen hardly any this summer. A few, but nothing like he used to when he was a boy. You remember them too, how they'd light up the pasture like paparazzi, turning the old mare into a celebrity. He blames it on all the spraying. For the first time, the grain farmers who owned the valley used a drone he watched float back and forth morningly over the corn, trailing a gown of poison. As he's talking, you're still remembering summer nights, running barefoot in the yard towards where one had appeared. When you got there, it was gone. but it wasn't gone, only gone dark in the darkening air. It resembled a pair of eyelashes flying. Only after you caught it did it glow. Then you'd peer into the bellows of your hands to see them fill with a ghoulish green light. It was what you'd wanted, but you let it go.
Like it. Like.
So are we doing all right?
Oh, um, it's been about half an hour, and you're. I don't want to wear you out, so maybe we could pause now and invite people to open their mics and chat with you, and then we'll hear something else from you at the end. How does that sound? Thank you. Thank you for reading two of the ones I love too. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you for asking for those. I appreciate it.
Sure.
Thank you, Austin. Love your energy.
Thank you.
The two books are just wonderful.
It was an amazing walk into almost my life. So love it.
Thank you. Thanks for saying that, Carol.
Austin, I grew up in Galena, Illinois.
Oh,
Another small town.
Yeah, I actually was living very near Galena, not even that long ago.
Yeah. Well,
Maybe.
that's good to know. You convinced me. I think I'll read a little something about my grandmother and that area at any rate, especially the fireflies. So
Yeah. Yeah, I miss those. I mean, for sure they're still there, but I just remember the pasture being, just completely mysteriously lit up with them. And, my folks say now that it's not like that anymore. And one of the many things that I still feel elegiac about.
well, the same thing with the butterflies, here, the monarch haven for it. It's getting everything, and the bees. So
Yeah.
slowly doing hard.
Yeah. When I came to California, the two things I missed the most from back east were fireflies and thunderstorms.
Yeah.
With
Oh, yeah.
lightning, thunderstorms with lightning.
Lightning.
Yeah.
Yeah.
That green, the green mist over the pasture of like hundreds and hundreds of fireflies. So each one calling its lady love or its gentleman love, and having a happy old time, I hope, in the pasture.
Austin, I too come from a small town. It's called Stockton, California. And we have a museum there that, of all things, one of the rooms I say is a darkened room with a mummy in it. And I too wondered how on earth Kiefer, or whatever his name was in his life, made it here.
Yeah.
I mean, did he go to San Francisco and come up the Inland Channel to Stockton? And then he found, but they actually gave him a mummified cat. And so I always pictured when the lights were out and everybody left, that the little mummified cat might have leapt down and sat on the mummy's lap or something, and they comforted one another. That's how
That's kind of beautiful. Yeah, I like that. Thanks for sharing that.
Thank you for your poem.
You're welcome. Sorry, I was stumbling around trying to figure out what to read. I thought it would be really exciting for me. It ended up being somewhat nerve-wracking, but I'm glad that you enjoyed them.
Very good.
We really couldn't tell.
Okay, good.
This is the first time that I have encountered your work, and I liked everything that you read very much. It tends to reinforce my long-standing belief in the inherent superiority of people named Smith.
Well, there's a lot of us, so.
Austin, I had a question for you. There was a line that Amy quoted from the Goose poem. See if I can get it right. The snow weighing them finds them weightless. And there were a couple of other lines like that too, in which you take words and shift the meaning through a line or two. And that seems to me a very Elizabethan thing to do. And I wondered if you could talk about how you got started doing that, where that came from.
Oh, that's cool. Yeah, and thank you everyone for everything in the chat. I might have missed a few things there, but I see that now. Yeah, it's funny because actually it's interesting you say that. At some point, maybe like 4 years ago, I started capitalizing the first letter of each line, like down the page. Sort of like you see like the classic poets do. And I don't know, I think it was me just kind of longing for like this stateliness. I kind of wanted to like return to kind of some sort of, I don't know. I think it might, so I really enjoy sort of syntactical complexity, like where I kind of play with language in that way. Like I love puns to the great frustration of my students, but I love tricks with words and language. And so I think there was probably something to do with that, where I literally saw the geese standing on the snow and thought of the snow. And I was already thinking about how like poor/rich they were because they have nothing but themselves. And suddenly the snow struck me as seeming like a scale that was weighing them and finding them weightless. And I think I just enjoyed that. I think I just, when I was a kid, like watching my dad read poems, like my first experience of poetry was really sonic. Like I just hearing this elevated register of language, very different from how he usually spoke. So all to say that I hear you on the Elizabethan, but I feel like it's generally just like, I also write fiction and I write prose. So I really almost need to teach myself that I'm writing a poem by kind of like elevating the language a bit, or else I can easily kind of fall into, I suppose I could write a short story about two geese. But I actually have to kind of remind myself I'm writing poetry. So that might be one of the reasons that line felt kind of.
So Austin, what you have to do now is write a poem about the geese owning the earth.
I'm gonna leave that one for you.
Well,
Send it.
well, I don't know if they can do that, but I live in a place where the geese stay year round, who used to be migratory. And so they nest on the roofs of our houses. They have their babies and walk them down our lanes on the way to the creek. And it's a whole lifestyle for these geese that they do apparently take up with lifetime partners. But the whole thing they go through, is something you gave a suggestion about that I always think of this when I think about in our culture, we have all these things that are down-lined or full of down, but don't understand how very important this is. And that's why I made the comment there about the that is what the female goose does. We've watched her on our roof. She lines the nest literally with the down from her breast. And once you see this, you never are able to think about down in quite the same way. Well, this is what your poems do. They give us moments that, just moments that make us realize how, sort of like the way the eclipse did, how we don't take a few quiet moments just to look at a single thing, just a single amazing thing. And I thank you for that, because they all have it. They all have it lovely, lovely.
What town do you live in?
Los Gatos. Los Gatos has become a gathering spot for geese, but not yet in a way that is too disturbing to anyone. Of course, everyone complains about the poop, but really, who among us doesn't, and so forth. But in general, they are so sweet the way they share their lives with us, that most of us are very pleased to have them there. It's on a regular turn. They stay there year round, but they only, mate during a certain period, and then they have these adorable, fuzzy little critters.
Well, as far as a potential future poem, I do think the phrase "the geese shall inherit the earth" has a nice ring to it.
It does.
It does. Yes, yes.
It does.
Shall we toss for who's going to write the poem? I think maybe on that note, because we have quite a healthy open mic list, why don't we stop recording in a few moments? And those of you in the Zoom room, please stay online if you'd like to take part in the open mic. Thanks to all our YouTube listeners. And please tune in for our next regular Coastside Poetry event on Tuesday, May 14th, when we'll welcome our very own Joel Katz as a feature. So thanks so much for joining us and for helping to keep the lamps of poetry burning. So.